Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast which asks which movies are well worth watching and remembering for all time. Every episode we discuss a different piece of film history to decide if it should make its way into our movie vault. Filled with questions, trivia and crazy challenges, it's the perfect way to deep dive into a myriad of movies. But don't just take my word for it. Here's a glimpse of what to expect in today's episode. But it does remind me a lot of Demolition Man into the...
Oh, I'm done. I'm done. Goodbye.
I am honestly losing...
Get yourself a drink, by the way, Craig. I realised you never got yourself a glass of water, which I felt bad for.
I am honestly losing my mind.
I know.
That is insane that you have actually... I mean, it's interesting that you think there's a plot, because that is a shock to me.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? Great. I'll be back. Here's Johnny. Oh, hi, Mark.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
I'm Batman. It's not the boss. It's a silly movie moon. I'll get you, my pretty.
To infinity and beyond. You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
Well, good movies.
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that asks which movies are well worth watching and which deserve to be remembered for all time. I'm your host, David Oscar, and I'm joined by our very own harbinger of chaos. It's my co-host, Craig McDonald. Hello, Craig.
I was going to ask you to think very carefully about how you're going to try and link me to this film. So I'm glad that you decided, no, we're not going to do that. We're just fine.
I was tempted to just be like, I don't know how to introduce this episode, but...
And joining me this week is our very own pimp, Craig McDonald.
I was tempted to go with a similar word to that, which is prick, as it is in this film mentioned that, like, I am a prick. And I was just like, that's harsh. But the subtle connection is that I think, as we've mentioned already, you know, you've suggested a lot of films in the past few weeks.
Don't
don't
insinuate this is my fault.
I think I'm going with what I did before, which is similar vibes. I think that by suggesting Full Monty, you have led us here.
That's harsh. It's genuinely harsh.
Well, we'll see what the story is by the end of the year. Will I just be like, Craig led us to this Christmas film, Craig led us to Showgirls. It'll just keep going on and on.
I'm sorry that, like, you've had no input over the films of this year. That's not my fault, though.
I'm not saying my input has affected that, but maybe the road
But clearly
choices...
hasn't affected it. No one's chosen your films, mate.
Well, what I'm saying is that the specific films you have chosen have led to these wild directions we've gone in.
Yeah, but at the same time, right, that's kind of what this podcast is meant to do.
Yeah. No, I am also loving the wild directions we're going in. Fitting in with that, I'll go straight to someone who's become quite a regular on here now. It is our good friend, film reviewer and fellow podcaster, Mary Muñoz. Hello, Mary.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me back. I feel like I've got like whiplash because the last time I was on here, we were discussing something really wholesome and sweet.
That's exactly why I thought, right, go in with the kind of harbinger of chaos vibes, because Mary would also have been through just an erratic array of films in being on this podcast recently, especially when you look back to Christmas, which was a very kind of strange Olive the Other Reindeer, but then the wholesomeness of... what was the Netflix cartoon Angela's Christmas? I'm like,
oh yeah,
and I'm like, oh, you know, Catholic Angela wouldn't be very happy with us watching this film. I don't think.
No, we have been through the emotional ringer together, so I'm very much looking forward to chatting with you guys about this.
Let's get on to what we are discussing, so we can break it all down. So, Craig, for those who didn't catch last time's episode, can you please catch us up on how we came to talk about today's film?
So in last episode, when we were discussing the relatively wholesome stripping film, The Full Monty, we had the 250 podcast guys of Darren and Andrew with us. In the end, after a nail-biting, and I mean nail-biting because it literally went to a tie-break in the end, with a reversal victory for Darren, in the end, he was encouraged to choose his own film suggestion, so he decided to go from the stripping of men to the stripping of women into Showgirls.
For? You gonna win?
I'm gonna dance. a spot open in the chorus line. I think you should try out.
I got an audition.
Okay, ladies, I got one interest here, and that's the show. I don't care whether you live or die. I want to see you dance, and I want to see you smile.
From the creators of Basic Instinct, the last time they took you to the edge. This time, they're taking you all the way.
We take the cash, we cash the check, we show them what they want to see.
It's not about fair, it's about power.
You're a stripper, don't you get it?
I'm a dancer.
She's dazzling, she's exciting, and she's what Las Vegas is all about. Showgirls. Leave your inhibitions at the door.
Yep. So today we'll be talking all about Showgirls from 1995 and asking the question of whether it deserves the honor of a place in our movie vault, our vault that encapsulates memorable movies for all time. So for those who don't know, the story of Showgirls is all alone in the world. Nomi Malone makes her way to Las Vegas, determined to make a name as a dancer while putting her unspoken past behind her. Her first true friend in Vegas, Molly Abrams, works as the costumer for Goddess, the topless production at Stardust. It is through Molly that Nomi catches the eye of Goddess headliner Crystal Connors and Crystal's boyfriend Zach Carey, Stardust's entertainment director. In her attempt to achieve fame and fortune, Nomi discovers the good, the bad, and the very bad about Vegas life, especially among the rich and beautiful. So this film is directed by Paul Verhoeven. It is written by Joe Terrace, also known for writing Basic Instinct and Silver from 1993. The music is by David A. Stewart, cinematography by Jost Varkano, also known for Das Boot and RoboCop, and it is edited by Mark Goldblatt and Mark Helfrich. In terms of cast, you got quite a lot of well-known names and faces here. You got Elizabeth Berkley as Nomi Malone, Kyle MacLachlan as Zach Carey, Gina Gershon as Crystal Connors, Glenn Plummer as James Smith, Robert Davi as Al Torres, Alan Rutchins as Tony Moss, Gina Rivera as Molly Abrams, Lynn Tucci as Henrietta Bazoom, Greg Travis as Phil Newark, Al Ruscio as Mr. Carlman, Patrick Bristow as Marty Jacobson, William Shockley as Andrew Carver, and Michelle Johnston as Gay. This is classed as an erotic drama thriller from, as I said, Paul Verhoeven. So he's also known for directing RoboCop, Total Recall, Starship Troopers, and The Hollow Man, as well as erotic thriller Basic Instinct in 1992. Hence the connection then with also the writer and the cinematographer working on those films. So those are his biggest kind of credits in the films that he's known for. He won Academy Award for Best Foreign Film sort of early in his career, and I guess that led to a lot of his like later success with, you know, originally he was successful with Dutch films. He later returned to Europe, making the Dutch war film Black Book in 2006. So ever since his success in the 90s and the 80s, he's kind of gone, you know, back to his roots, I guess, in a way. But yeah, as far as this film is concerned, known for its nudity and its budget, it was produced on what was then a sizable budget of around 45 million, and it has significant controversy and hype due to the sex and nudity that was in the theatrical release. In the United States, the film was rated NC-17 for nudity and erotic sexuality throughout, some graphic language and sexual violence, and it was actually the first and to date only NC-17 rated film to be given a wide release in mainstream theaters in America. So it kind of became well known because a lot of like teenagers, etc., were like creeping into the theaters and watching it. It's also known for them becoming a box office bomb because they only grossed 37.8 million against a much higher budget. It had a lot of negative reviews, but it did have a lot of success on the home video market, generating another $100 million, which then allowed it to turn a profit. First video premiere, Verhoeven prepared an R-rated cut for rental outfits that would not carry NC-17 films. This edited version runs 3 minutes shorter and deletes some of the more graphic footage. Showgirls was a critical failure upon release, panned for its acting, characters, dance numbers, directing, plot, screenplay, and sex scenes, and consistently ranked as one of the worst films ever made. Despite this, Showgirls has become regarded as a cult film and subject to critical re-evaluation, with some notable directors and critics considering it a serious satire worthy of praise.
Sorry, what?
Well, that's what will make it definitely a very interesting conversation today. So when this was brought up, it was a mix of experiences from us in terms of having seen it or experiences with it before. I had never seen it before. Craig was familiar with it. So then in terms of like reaching out to our kind of circle of guests, etc., it was interesting to see who else had seen it. And Mary, you had quite a visceral reaction of like, oh God, that film.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I said to you, this is one of the worst films ever made. When you're like, do you want to talk about it? And I was like, well, yeah,
of
okay.
course.
I mean, my tolerance for crap films is really high. Like I sat through David Caruso's Jade. Like I love an erotic thriller, but this always stands out. Is I remember, I think the first time I saw it was maybe about 10 years ago, but I remember even then seeing it and thinking, wow, this is so terrible. There's not a single aspect of it that is redeeming. Like there's not like one good part of it, whether it's, soundtrack or, sort of cinematography or acting. There's just nothing going for it. And having rewatched it again for this podcast, I can confirm that my opinion has not changed.
That's good to know then. Yeah. So we know well, in my head anyway, I know where we're kind of going in terms of people's reactions and stuff like that. So, and I guess to you, the standouts were like the sex scenes and stuff like that. So that's what you remembered it for?
Yeah, because I always remember someone described the sort of pool scene, which has become quite notorious, as Elizabeth Berkley thrashing around like an unmanned garden hose. And that has really stayed in my head as a turn of phrase. And yeah, again, watching it last night, I was chuckling away, which I don't think was the effect that they were going for. It was obviously supposed to be really sort of like sexy and over the top, and actually you just look at it and go, there's no way those two people are actually making physical contact, let alone having sex. But I mean, let's not be fussy about things.
Yeah, it's I think there was, when I was watching it, kind of like, oh, okay, I think I vaguely have seen, references to this, or yeah, it might have been in like top 10 lists and that kind of thing. So I recognize some elements of it, but largely I was like completely pretty much unaware of this film. I didn't know all that much about it at all. So, it has been interesting to go into it.
You should have known it for at least like the referencing in The Simpsons they did of this film.
See, I was thinking that in terms of like when you get those type of films, especially in the 90s and some of the more like, like satires of erotic stuff in The Simpsons, I was like, oh, is this something that The Simpsons was referencing?
They literally go to the cinema to watch this.
Oh, is this Showgirls that they go to see?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Right, okay.
It's literally
my Simpsons mug was well placed.
Marge and Homer literally go... It's that episode where they give Bart, like, the focusing drug. And they're like, well, he's being behaved now. We can leave him and Lisa alone. Right. We're going to go and watch Showgirls. And it's literally, that's like, you're one of the most talented dancers I've ever seen. You can't give it up and become a teacher.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the thing is, like, there are lots of... I mean, as I say, I use David Caruso's Jade as an example, obviously, to be flippant. It's another terrible film. But there are lots of good erotic thrillers that came out. It was very much a genre of the time. I just feel like this is so... I don't know, I feel like it's trying to be this sort of almost like telenovela style, really like hyperbolic, over the top thing in order to deliver some level of satire. But everything about it just falls apart so that it can't possibly be satire. It's just rubbish.
Yeah, there's one glaring issue with the film that I'm sure we will explore, which to me makes it seem like if there is any satire involved in this, it's always going to fall flat.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting that you mentioned there, Mary, about that element of it was something quite popular at the time, because as we said before the episode, it's like, is this a thing? Is this a genre within itself? Can you talk about the wider context? And I think I was trying to think of like, okay, what are at least some of the similar films which I think of in terms of that, and are there successful versions of this? Are they made with only sort of like one intention in mind, and especially when you look at the kind of era it was made and what the director was making, especially, those are not really on the sort of same wavelength, apart from Basic Instinct potentially. But that it does seem to be a genre which very much has kind of like faded away more. And if you are looking more at that kind of like storyline or that kind of world, it's more through a kind of more serious lens. There's not that kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? The kind of glorification of it in a way. It's showing the negative aspects of that, even with something like Magic Mike or something. And you do get like, you know, fun films, I guess, like Coyote Ugly and stuff like that. And I guess that there is a big element of like, how good is it in terms of representation of men, of women, of, you know, like people in these kind of industries, etc.
So I do think it does try to expose the sort of underside or sleaziness. I mean, but the problem is that it's too on the nose. So even from the very opening of the film, you know, where she gets in the truck because she's hitchhiking, Nomi that is, you know, that guy is headed to Vegas quite literally, you know, coiffured like Elvis. And immediately, you know, the shirt's unbuttoned and it's, what can you do for me? And, you know, she gets the flick knife out or whatever. And it's just, everything about it is far too on the nose. So any seriousness behind, you know, the messages about whether it's sort of exploitation of young women or, you know, the whole idea that you can be a small town person trying to live out a big dream in a big city, you can't take any of it seriously. Because there's, well, first of all, there's usually someone's boobs flapping in the screen, and that's why you can't take anything that's been said seriously. But also, it's just far too on the nose, so it doesn't feel. I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it later, but there is one scene in particular that does feel very realistic and is quite shocking. But again, it's just lost in the melee of boobs. Is the bottom line.
I think there's just one crucial element that's needed in all of this, especially if you're going to look at the entire industry of, say, from stripping to like the shows, which is that I'm pretty sure when you were telling me like the deeper sort of production list earlier, and when I was even watching the credits, I was just like, this just seems very, very male heavy in production and in writing. And I'm just like, I don't understand what perspectives you guys have that means this is going to be interesting to watch, and this isn't just going to be a lot of flash, a lot of pomp, a lot of breasts. It just, and the fact you also said the director did like what RoboCop and Total Recall, yeah, that just shows to me it's like, okay, so you're just a lad. You were just a lad, and you just get the opportunity. It's like, oh, what if we do a film about strippers, and all they do is basically dance naked and like just fuck people all the time. But just to make sure that we're not making poor, what if we just right towards the end imply that it's bad?
Yeah, it does.
What if we do that, guys?
It's very performative in its care, I guess, of it, in the treatment of its subject. I mean, you do have, as I say, very stereotypical sleazy male characters, you know, right from the offset. But that's not to say that they are offsetting themselves by these sort of sympathetic female characters, because there maybe only is one or two of those. It really does seem like an excuse to, you know, let's take some sort of stars of the time, and obviously Elizabeth Berkley coming off her Saved by the Bell era, and, you know, have them parade naked for, I think, was it 2 hours, 8 minutes of torture I sat through last night? Something like that. At one time, something along
those. Yeah, it's close to that. Just the amount of different people who are just like, what you're doing is wrong. My slightly different version of what you've been doing is right. And I'm just like, what the hell are you people talking about? Saying, oh, you shouldn't be a showgirl. When you were a stripper, it was better because that's at least honest. What the fuck are you talking about?
I do like this theme that we have of maybe like the list of like famous directors throughout time. There will be like Paul Verhoeven will be there as a lad, which we similarly had Peter Jackson as a weirdo a few weeks ago when we were talking about Brain Dead. I think we're just going to continue to have this kind of just basic summary of directors.
Yeah, but I think we need a clarification on lad, because some people will be like, oh yeah, like absolutely, like no, as in like you are a virgin boy who just clearly needs to touch grass.
We'll just have like an emoji next to it, like, which is like, oh, you know. So Craig, what is your general thoughts about this film?
It's bad. I think I've already hinted at the issues at the issues I necessarily have with this. I think they suggest darker elements behind the scenes of this, but sort of completely overwash it in lieu of something which just seems like a sort of career cattiness behind it, right? They don't ever really explore the fact that like Nomi's past is trouble. I mean, the moment you see it, like she said, I haven't got parents, I'm just like, I'm pretty sure I know everything about you, at which point by the end, when it's like the reveal of Polly's sort of history, I was not surprised by any of it. I was just like, yeah, this does seem to be the accurate description of people who actively, I'm sorry, you don't go looking, like if you're homeless or familyless, you don't go looking for Vegas to just like be like an absolute star. You are going because there is literally one thing you can do, one thing, unfortunately, and that just seems to be it. Like, at which point I'm just like, why are you in any way, A, showing loads of people who are just like glorifying it? B, like I've already suggested, you have people like, is it Al who runs the strip joint?
Robert Davi.
Who's just like, nah, my business is legit. This, like, you won't last there. I'm just like, what are you doing? And just openly telling new girls, like, you want to stay longer than a week, you got to give me a blowjob, and just, oh, Jesus Christ.
It's one of these things though as well, like you watch it and it's obviously very exploitative, but the whole point is it's supposed to be showcasing the exploitative nature of that industry, but you watch it and you just like, all of these actors are being extremely exploited by this. Like, I do not need to see that much of your anatomy. And I too watched this on late night TV one night. I had a huge crush on Kyle MacLachlan at the time because I think I just started like watching Twin Peaks or whatever, watched it, and with that terrible haircut that he has in this, between that and the pool scene, I was like, I need a break from Kyle MacLachlan for a long time. I think it's a film that sets out to be this sort of, I don't even know if you can call it satire. I feel like it's trying to do some sort of high-level messaging on, look at the dark and seedy side of, the city of sin or whatever you want to call it. And then it just is 2 hours of, as I say, like, boobs being flashed across the screen with no actual real point to it. Because the thing is, the characters who are terrible, which in effect is all of them save for Molly, they don't actually receive any comeuppance, which is kind of what you're looking for in this sort of Hollywood narrative, isn't it? You're wanting these bad guys, these sleazy guys, or whatever it is, to get found out, or to be shown for who they are, and that never happens. And the problem is as well that Nomi as a character isn't someone that you can I'm watching this obviously from a slightly different perspective of you guys, but I'm watching it going, there's not a female character in this film who I think, I could warm to you, or I could be friends with you, because again, all the women are reduced to this sort of scheming, catty, out for themselves, and really only good for one thing.
Yeah, they all seem way too happy to be in that situation.
Yeah.
Like, at no point do they, it's other people telling them that they shouldn't be happy in that situation, which is also problematic insofar as like choice feminism. If people wanted to be there, then fine, let them be there. But in order to make this sort of story, you have to show that they just don't want to be there. And then the only comeuppance is what? A guy gets spat in the face and someone else gets beaten up. Great. Yeah, that totally makes up for all of the horrible things that you've done. And for those critics out there who say that this seems like an attempt at satire, I have a very direct message for you. Give up. Stop critiquing. You do not have any sense of media literacy whatsoever. Yeah. I'm ashamed of you.
Yeah.
In regards to what, sorry?
Well, you earlier said like some critics tried to defend it as like an attempt at satire.
Yeah.
There is no satire.
I mean,
Stop.
Satire obviously supposed to make you laugh and make you think. This film certainly makes me laugh. Probably not for the reasons that they want me to, but it doesn't make me think beyond as the stuff I've just outlined there. The characters that you want to get their comeuppance don't. It seems very exploitative, and just, I don't know, there's something about it that even watching it now, obviously nearly 20 years on from when it was released, like, you cannot imagine a film like this. I mean, obviously you've got the kind of, I would say, similar themes maybe in sort of like your Magic Mikes, where it's trying to expose a kind of seedy underside, but you've hit the nail on the head. Like, every single character is like desperate to be in this goddess show, and it's not until somebody says to them, oh, you don't want $1,000 for that because you're going to have to sleep with so and so at the end of it, that they go, oh yeah, no, I don't want that. And it's like, why are you having to be told that this is a bad thing? You're being put in a bad situation, or you're being made vulnerable. And even like the Robert Davi character, where he's sitting there going, oh, you know, if you take them into the back room, they're not allowed to touch you. But if they come all over you, make sure you get extra money. What the hell? What is that? What is that for career advice?
And then later on in the film comes again, no pun intended, turns up again later in the film and says, wow, it must be weird to not have anyone come on you for a change. I'm just like...
So can I just say that is one of the lines that always stands out to me. So there's that, and there's the one where he says, you look better topless, and she goes, you should see me bottomless. It's some of the worst writing I've ever heard. It hurts my ears even just thinking about it.
I genuinely do ask, have the writers of this film spoken to women?
Well, allegedly
not just in the industry, just in general, have they spoken to women? Hang on, did you say allegedly they did?
Yeah, so apparently they went out to sort of strippers and showgirls and were like, tell me your good experiences, tell me your bad experiences, and they sort of took them verbatim and popped them into the film. Now, obviously, they've built a script around it, but apparently the experiences is thanks to research. Now, just to be clear, research doesn't, you know, if you're just sitting in a strip club one night sticking 20s down somebody's G-string, that is not research, which is kind of how I feel how the research might have gone for this. But allegedly they did speak to actual showgirls.
Because I feel like in that situation, it's like, so how do you feel about your job? Like stripper, showgirl, etc. looks over over her shoulder to the boss in the corner. I'm having a great time.
I've only had to use a deep clean twice today. I'm loving life.
I guess, it's like...
Oh, David coming in to defend us.
No, well... In terms of the
Dave,
research
did you
thing,
enjoy it? Just say yes. Did you enjoy it?
Well, I was just going to get to the research thing, which I think it goes down to that classic thing of like, one, there's the element of like, as we've seen in later years, is you really need to involve those people in the process itself, not just ask them, which has been, you know, like the folly of many creatives.
That is exactly what I've been saying.
Which is what happened to other films which have come down the line, which I'm, you know, sure might come up later on, etc., in which people have had experience in that and are actively in the film and things like that. And obviously, you know, when I was watching this, you know, I've seen some of the films that are like that. So I guess I've never seen as much of the exploitative kind of glorified version of things, or when it has been that very like campy, absolutely ridiculous 60s, 70s stuff. Yeah, when I think about like how are you representing that like negative side of what they're trying to go towards, then I think of something like Black Swan or something like that, in which it literally is, you know, overcome someone, and there's that kind of like vanity and that hunger for fame, but obviously they are very much going for a kind of like, you know, in-depth look at somebody. And I guess in a way I kind of see this as a build-up to that in some ways, hopefully that they've learned lessons from this film. But yeah, I'm sorry guys, I actually didn't mind this film. I feel dirty now because you guys have hated on it so much, but I don't know. But I think if I could defend myself,
same way you. Do you remember when I texted you last night saying we used to be friends because I had to watch this? Like, I'm going to repeat myself because I cannot believe you're defending this.
I genuinely cannot believe we're in a situation where I'm on the moral high ground against David.
Coming next week, Mary and Craig's new podcast.
Yep, you're not allowed on.
If I may defend myself, I think that I went in with such low expectations, bearing in mind that this was after, you know, Mary had warned me about it, etc. I think I went in with such low expectations that I was pleasantly surprised that there was actually, I didn't know if it was going to just be pool scene, kind of like The Room, you know, level of badness. And I was like, oh, okay, there is actually, you know, a story here. There are some themes going on. And because it was from, I know there's a lot of hands going up on heads at the moment, but, you know, I've said it before on this podcast, and Craig will hate me for this, but it does remind me a lot of Demolition Man into the...
Oh, I'm done. I'm done. Goodbye.
I am honestly losing...
Get yourself a drink, by the way, Craig. I realised you never got yourself a glass of water, which I felt bad for.
I am honestly losing my mind.
I know.
That is insane that you have actually... I mean, it's interesting that you think there's a plot, because that is a shock to me, because to me it's just like, oh, how can we get as many people naked as possible or sort of thrashing around? So it's excellent that you think there's a plot.
I think that's why, because I was just like, I knew going in, I was like, right, it is the naked film, that's all there's gonna be. So I think because I was so unfazed by that, because I knew it was gonna be there, that I was kind of like, I don't know whether I was looking for the deeper context or whatever. I don't find that it is artistic masterpiece, and I did find all the hidden gems. And I will say, I don't agree with those critics. I don't think it is a satire. I think that's why I bring up Demolition Man. I think it's a very strange breed of film, and this is why I think I'm a bit more forgiving of it, which is why I mentioned that film.
I'm back, by the way. I'm pounding a pint of vodka.
I think that it's just such a weird amalgamation to me, in which it's kind of like, it's almost such a parody of itself. It's almost become bulletproof. So what I mean is that I think if anyone was to try and satirize this, they couldn't, because it's just its own joke.
Okay, so I do agree with you that.
I think it's a bit like The Room, in the sense of like, you can't make fun of The Room. All you can do is like make a behind the scenes film about The Room, about how ridiculous it is. And I don't think this is to the level of that ridiculousness. Though I guess the pool scene could be quite similar to somebody thrusting into somebody's chest or hip or whatever Tommy Wiseau was aiming for in that film. But I don't know, maybe it's just, again, we've talked about it a bunch of times. I felt that, maybe the visuals were winning me over. I thought that at least the fact you got somebody who's been on films like Total Recall, RoboCop, I was like, I think if this was made nowadays and it just looked like an ugly digital kind of like really garish kind of like too realistic film, I think the fact that it still has that kind of like 90s grain to it. I know Craig hates this argument of like, it looks like a film.
Stop defending things that look like movies.
But I think it adds to the charm of something. It does add to the charm of something.
It aims for a lot of Vegas. Right, yeah. Because like this, you're obviously introduced to these elaborate sets, and they're all in sort of like, azure blues and sparkling. And she's got the nails. Obviously, the thing is that she paints her nails really well. She always has on like glittery, eyeliner and things like that. Like it leans very heavy into what I would say, are sort of stereotypical notions of what a Vegas show is like. And even when they are away from the theatre set, even when Naomi goes round to Zach's house, even that's like, in your head, if you could draw a sort of stereotypical sort of 90s playboy kind of mansion type of thing, right down to the dolphins in the pool, it's got it. So I think it lives up to what you maybe think of when you think of that sort of 90s Vegas stereotype, which is fine, but it is very surface level like the rest of the film. But I will agree with you that I think it would probably be impossible to parody this, but only because it is so bad.
And I think, but that's what I'm saying is, I think that kind of like typical viewpoint of like his pad and everything like that, it to me adds just a bit of charm, which I don't think would have worked if I watched it back in, like 95, 96. I think it's just me looking at it now. I'm like, like what a time in which at least these films looked nice, and there was a bit of cinematography there, or there was an illusion to try and tell story through shots and through visuals. And Craig might, sort of sigh at that, but it's important. A very well-versed cinematographer has made this film. I think that is worth mentioning and worth highlighting, regardless of whether there's boobs on screen. I think he still makes all the kind of like the show stuff
it's
look
just
really
a
effective.
Volume of boobs, Dave. Like,
I'm not saying the boobs. I'm not excusing
many.
the boobs, but the set that they're on is very nice.
That just sort of adds to my issue with this film, right? I agree with you. I think production design and cinematography wise, it's a very, very like striking film, and I think they do a lot to put a lot of sort of energy into the dance numbers, even if after a while the dancing seems needlessly aggressive and weird at times.
Oh, it's needlessly aggressive from the start. This is what I never understood about this film, is everyone tells her how amazing she is. When there's no fluidity in her movement, it looks like she's about to start a fight, and she's constantly baring her teeth. Like, and I don't know, again, if that was a choice to have her sort of looking more aggressive as opposed to feminine, and maybe it was a point about how she sees the industry or whatever. Maybe I'm giving them far too much credit for what's actually happening. Maybe she's just a bad dancer. But even that, I couldn't wrap my head around, because she's so sharp and angular, and nothing about it. You don't look at it and go, wow, she's a great dancer.
Yeah.
I did honestly think that they would lead into a kind of like, she's an erratic, like throwing herself around, and like James would refine her, make her a better dancer or something like that. And I was like, okay, that never happened. She just continued to like thrash around and like, like pop her body everywhere, which I agree is not good dancing. But I think I can kind of, I agree with you guys when James had that whole notion of kind of like, what you're doing is no different. But then later on, it's just like, well, what you're doing is no different either. But I would push back in the sense I do think that what his character, I think what is the major problem with this film for me especially is the acting and the performances, and a lot of the dialogue that they're giving off. There just seems to be scenes in which, again, I'm like, this looks beautiful, but what you're saying is absolute garbage. In which they've like run into a scene and, you know, I'm like, oh, I love what's going on here with the motion of the camera and the cuts and everything. Visually, you're telling the story quite well, like when that kind of singer's like poster is there, but what they're saying is just like, it kind of just seems like they're just reading, here's the script, I'll just say that, okay, cool, like, you know, quickly go. I think, you know, that happens a lot. And I think especially with James's character, in which it almost seemed like a kind of like school play to me at times, in which he's just like, you know, they're saying these kind of like cool, gritty things or things that might look good on paper, but it just comes across as quite like amateur dramatics kind of thing of like, you will never know the true meaning of art, you know, or that kind of thing, which is not a direct quote, but that's just the type of thing of which I think of. But I think story-wise, I was still like, I think I can appreciate what you're trying to say here, in that there is a difference between... what he is saying is that what you're doing at that hotel is no different to what you're doing at the Cheetah, which I think is a decent story to make, in that he's just trying to warn her, look, you think this is this big glamorous thing, and it's no different to what you're already doing.
And just undermines it by literally also trying to be a person who is like, what you should be doing is doing this individual dance scene that I wrote specifically for you, which is basically just his ploy for trying to seduce, and actively has shown that he's just using it as a pickup line, right? I am a firm believer of message should be informed by the person, character, whatever, coming from behind it, right? I cannot buy into something being a critique of one industry when it's actually been done by such a problematic actor behind the scenes. Look, there are lots of films that I think look pretty, but when you actually look at sort of the substance behind it, it's quite shocking, right? There are lots of people who defend 50 Shades of Grey in that entire series for looking like a very high production. Again, some people do. I don't. I agree with you, Mary, shaking your head.
I don't agree.
But there are definitely people, and there are people that like you respect who have definitely said, "Oh, I thought this was a very good-looking
they
film."
called it a polished rat turd.
Yeah, they called it a polished rat turd. But that's the problem, right? When people see a lot of very pretty looking things, that often sort of distracts them from like the underlying issues, right? And I think insofar as how this film seems to have been constructed, I think there's a lot of effort put into making like sort of like the dance scenes look very, very striking, very bold. Like the sex scenes look very, very striking and just quite energetic and passionate, even if it just makes no sense. Because it just seems to distract from... They're just trying to say, like, this is why the audience are going to be watching this film. Let's just give them that. And then any sort of message behind that. I agree with David. I think it's performed quite poorly. And I think story-wise, structured-wise, there's just no anchor for us to fall back on. There's no... As Mary was saying earlier, there's just no moral grounding of character that we can just follow here. The closest we get is Molly.
I was going to say, I did want to say Molly, I think is...
Yeah, but the problem is right until, like, she kind of got her into this, and then it's like, oh, but don't get too far into this, which is a contradictory message. But then two, angry with her because she knows that she clearly pushed Crystal down the steps, good, is willing to forgive and go to that party and then go right into the sort of, like, element of the party just because she fancies the singer involved, which again I'm just like, no, you need to keep a moral consistency here. And that's when, like, right at the end, and obviously the horrific thing happens to her, like, just out of nowhere. So yeah, it's just hard. There's
some elements of it where the story's not new, right? Because I on rewatch of it this time, I was like, oh, it's kind of got elements of All About Eve, the sort of, you know, young ingenue coming up who's slightly morally dubious and trying to take the place of the sort of older star. But at least in All About Eve, you really like Bette Davis, whereas Gina Gershon as Crystal Connors in this, like, but from the minute she's introduced as a character and she's got, you know, the 80s like square French tips and the terrible lip liner and everyone gets called darling, and it's like, that's the type of female character that, for me, as a woman watching this, I hate, because I hate seeing these sort of, like, you know, characters who basically just, you know, use their, you know, flutter their eyelashes to get what they want, or they are, you know, they sort of kick the ladder away once they've made it to the top so that nobody else can get there, and they're very female in themselves, and I hate those portrayals of women. Like, if I wanted to watch that, I would literally just go and watch an episode of The Apprentice. And I really hate that type of female character. So again, like, there is a relatively potentially interesting storyline there as well, where you're just like, why is it that Nomi really wants to be this woman? Because Crystal's not a great example of what it is to be a successful woman, because she's horrible to those around her. She uses people and exploits people, and obviously tries to get Nomi into a couple of sort of like unsavory situations as well, and tries to destroy her. And they never really explain that relationship at all. They don't really explain why Nomi wants to be her, other than she's the lead, which seems a bit empty. But then they also don't really explain why Crystal becomes immediately obsessed with Nomi either. Sorry, I'm just at a loss. My thoughts have trailed off because actually there's no plot to this.
This is just a pornographic black swan.
Kind of. Well, they also I like you were saying there, Mary. It reminded me in a way of like A Star Is Born in some ways as well, of that rising stardom and how that kind of like goes wrong, but obviously again done much better way and not as kind of sinister.
To be clear, A Star Is Born is the one who did it in a much better way.
Yeah, exactly.
In case anyone misinterpreted the structure of David's sentence.
So I think that, but I don't know, where I was willing to give it credit is, I think you're absolutely right, Mary. I think, and that's why films now are showing that better representation and like characters who support other women. I guess the reading I kind of got from it, which is whether that's good or bad. And I think that what the film could have done a better job at, like you said, maybe through characters like Molly. What I'm saying is they could have improved this largely through Nomi's character through the start and end of this film, not just the whole like getting in the truck thing, in terms of maybe showing a bit of her backstory, showing why she's the way she is. I think I struggled to get on board with her, also captivated by her character, because she's a very difficult character to kind of get invested in, because she's just so aggressive, which is, like they said, they could just be like, well, that's just who she is. But you kind of want a bit of context as to why she's like that. And it's not really until the very, very end of the film in which you hear about her family and stuff, you're like, okay, maybe that explains why she's the way she is. But I didn't see it so much as like she wanted to be Crystal. I saw it more as she was like constantly like, I want to prove you wrong. And I kind of want to, she took offense at everything she said. Like she was like, oh, well, no, you're not a very good dancer if you work there. And it just seemed like she was constantly at odds with her. And she kind of was just, to me, it just seemed like she was just constantly chasing this dream that wasn't there. So that's why I didn't mind the story too much, in the sense I felt that it was just her pursuit of like what was in her head, which again, the film could have painted better. And all she just realized is that it's a horrible, toxic place. And I think that, yes, you can say that like, well, the film should have done a better job of representing the people within that are more three-dimensional, rounded characters. But also I was like, you can also make the argument that some places are just pure toxic. And I think if you're going to make that message, somewhere like Vegas would be the place to do that, in which it's like, these people are not good for you, get away from there kind of thing.
So I have two sort of responses to this, and I promise I'm going to be calm. One, I think it's so far as wanting to emulate Crystal, I think the film does various things to suggest that it's not necessarily I want revenge against you, or I want to prove you wrong. It's very much, I am after like the element of you. I just want the fame. I want the position. It's because they do portray various moments of like the sexual chemistry between the two anyway. So there's definitely the film applies this the attraction between them, which I think, again, quite problematic in how it's done. It's quite like abusive power relation.
Can I just add, I will say that is a very confusing element of the film. I think if she was like after her and that's all it was, it would work a lot better. Yeah. But I think the fact that she shows an attraction to her, kisses her at the end, really confuses.
Yeah, and that's why I think that's purely male gaze involved in that situation, right? That is very much the men for, wouldn't it be great if all these sexy women, if they started lusting after each other? Because you're right, there's literally no basis for this.
I think the thing is so again, it all comes down to this whole thing of like, basically everyone's got an agenda, everyone is horrible.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can do that because obviously everyone absolutely raves about Succession, myself included. There's not a character in that where you go, I can see myself in that character. But just because and maybe because it's a series and not a film or whatever, but they're so much more fleshed out, there's so much more nuance to it, as just opposed to like stereotypical like catty woman, or stereotypical sleazy guy with floppy hair, or in Robert Davi's case, stereotypical sleazy guy with like pencil mustache and popcorn face. There's nothing about, and that's why I don't understand why, come back to that point, people think it's satire, because it's so two-dimensional. Like there's no way this is operating on a deeper level. It's exactly like Vegas. It's just it's all glitter. There's no substance to it. So the reason they leave Vegas at the end is because they were trying to set it up for a sequel where she went to Los Angeles and had a sort of repeat incident, which obviously never happened. There is a sequel. It's called Pennies from Heaven, and it focuses on the character Penny. They get it with the Bob who starts in the Cheetah Club.
Yes.
But obviously nobody else came back for this, and why would you? I think it pretty much ruined a few careers. I struggle with this notion that, in particular, and I'm not saying that. So I'm going to be clear on this. I'm not saying that male writers and male directors can't tell good stories from a female perspective. But I think when this is so intrinsically about female vulnerability and what it is to be a woman and to maybe own or not own your sexuality or your body, as the case may be, then I think that story does not belong to what feels like it's been written by. It's like you've almost said to like 14-year-old boys, like, oh, tell us what what a great idea for a film. They've gone, oh, strippers. And that's kind of what this feels like, as opposed to, maybe perhaps even a more sympathetic treatment of Crystal as a character. How did she get to where she is, where she's so jaded and horrible that, how did she get to that stage? Or, why is it that I can't remember the character's name, but she has 2 kids literally running through the background of the show? Or why is it that these women are so set up against each other that they're literally willing to snap each other's bones in order to get a slightly, to move 2 inches to the front in a dance routine? Like, that to me is not a story that should be told by 2 men. Sorry.
No. And I think you're right, it's not to say that no man can tell a good story about, female characters, but then history hasn't done a whole good job of then when there have been examples of that. You look at somebody like Joss Whedon, who for a long time people were like, oh, you did Buffy, you did all this great stuff. That has very much changed in terms of that narrative now, in terms of like how he is viewed in Hollywood, the way that he treated female characters in Justice League, and the fact that Gal Gadot would not do like a lot of like the just purely sexist things that he wanted her to do in that film, or the reshoot of that film. And the fact that I think that he told Elizabeth Olsen to cry pretty in Age of Ultron, it's that kind of viewpoint that, a lot of male directors, I just tell the people at home that Mary was a mouth like, fuck you, or something like that. Love that. But
sorry, cry pretty. Yeah. That is honestly one of the, do you know what? I'd almost rather be told to smile more, which does happen a lot, but I'd honestly rather that than to cry pretty. That is, wow, that's gross.
So, okay. And again, I think this film is kind of alluding to elements of that, like the whole, like, talking about, like, somebody coming on you and all that kind of stuff. They are making allusions to this is a seedy, horrible world. So I was like, well, at least there is that. But again, it was more of at least there is that element.
Yeah, but it's then also portrayed that he really, really cared about her more than others do. And I'm just like, that's also kind of screwed up.
Yeah,
because there's the character of Zach and the character of James, both of whom Nomi believes at one point is genuinely invested, not just in her career, but in her as a person. And you're sitting watching it going, at various points, depending on the character, like, no, he's lying to you, or no, he's a douchebag. And it's so obvious as well. And I think that's, do you know, it's funny because when you log on to Amazon to watch it, it says drama, camp. And I think it does try to distract you with it is almost like a sort of sleight of hand trick. It's like, look over here, it's really shiny while we do all this terrible stuff. And then it really hits you with what happens to Molly. And that to me almost, so for me, it's one of the strongest scenes. In fact, it is the strongest scene in the entire film because of its realism. It's horrific. And every time I watch it, I feel like a slight panic attack coming on because I knew this was coming, obviously, this time around. But I kind of forgot that when she's thrown out of the room, there's like the trail of blood down her leg.
Yeah.
And it is horrific. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I don't know what it's doing in this film, because it's the one moment where you're really invested in the character. It's awful to watch. You can barely watch it. It's so violent. It's so horrific. But what is it doing in a film where literally people are using crystals and sequins to knock their competitors out? Like, it doesn't make sense.
It feels very unwarranted.
Yeah. And I think that what didn't help as well is the fact that, you know, there's that character earlier on who's like, you know, it's £1,000, you get paid for the day, etc., all that kind of stuff, you know, showing that he's a seedy, creepy character. You have that, like, guy from, is it Korea or something like that?
I thought it was Thailand or Taiwan.
Yeah, comes up to her and, you know, says about like, ooh, looking forward to the dance, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, to then have just like the only allusion to that character is just that she's obsessed with him. They see that poster. And that's where, like you, Mary, I was like, okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, this is very realistic and this is very, you know, strong in your messaging because, again, it's going down, you know, sometimes I can give things credit to like, okay, you've been bold, you've been very striking in what your messaging is saying. And this is what I was saying about earlier in terms of them thinking that they're being quite kind of like bold and evocative with their messaging. So by having it be like it cuts back and forth between the party and the, like, you know, the romantic music and she's there like dancing with him and then cut into that happening, I'm like, this is like horrific and makes it more horrific. And I think that they're intentionally doing that. And I can't give them too much credit for it because, like you said, one, it just comes out of nowhere. And especially for the character, I think if it was somebody who we'd already seen, but I'm like, where's this guy coming from? How does he represent the sleaze of this industry? I think there's an idea to kind of like, well, you know, we protect our own and nobody will know about this. And that's why I said that I think, you know, the ending of this film really would have dictated how much I respected about the story. And I think when she slept with the entertainment manager, I thought, well, if there's an element of like she's trying to, you know, like get one up on Crystal, or she's trying to kind of reveal something later on, and especially once, you know, Molly is like raped, you know, when she's saying like showtime and everything and she just goes and beats him up, I'm like, really? That was it? You know, I was like kind of like, I thought there was at least going to be some kind of like go up on stage and tell everyone, hey, you know, this big singer is a massive, you know, like sleazebag rapist and all these people are involved in it and have protected him. Or, you know, I thought it was leading to something like that, but it wasn't. It was just purely she just went to Molly and was like, I kicked the shit into him, so I've got redemption for you in that way. I almost felt like Molly was just there like, the fuck, you know, like in that bed, because she should also almost be more scared for her friend when she walks out of that hospital than when she entered there.
Well, there's that, and I felt like it was a sort of cheesy attempt at female empowerment, like, oh, look, the men won't do anything about it, so I'm taking it into my own hands and I'm going to kick the shit out of him. But also, yeah, it puts Molly in a more vulnerable position because now she is, so not only is, you know, her rapist being protected, he knows exactly, you know, who has beat him up and all the rest of it, so he can quite easily come in. And it also just makes Molly more passive and more of a victim because it's not like she has had any agency given back to her. It's Nomi that goes and sorts it out on her behalf.
Which is worse considering the fact that of everyone in the film who was trying to warn about don't get too into this industry, otherwise bad things will happen. It just has to happen to the most level-headed character. So it doesn't even create this idea of these are the seedy individuals you deal with if you get in too far. It just seems these are the seedy individuals you get involved with at any stage, which you're still advocating for, which means that I still don't know what the fundamental difference is in the situation.
Well, and also what I'd say, Mary, in terms of what you're saying about what is this doing here, and I think, again, I'm not justifying this, I'm just trying to work out, I think, and this is why I'm like, why was this here and not elsewhere? I think what they really should have done is, if you wanted to have this kind of illusion to like, look how glamorous and romantic and kind of like idealized this viewpoint is, and then look at the grim, dark reality behind the door. One, I would have done that scene into like, I think, yes, I watch it and go, okay, I can kind of give you a bit of credit for just how visceral you're being in that messaging. But I would argue, if I was in a meeting with you or I read that script, saying, I think you could have done this exact messaging so much better if you just had him holding her hand, walk in, door close, and that's it. And then maybe just see her afterwards. I'm like, that would be so much more impactful than actually yes, you could say, well, the horror of the event is showing it. It's like, I think, you know, this show don't tell. I think there is also, by not showing something that is very viscerally more striking sometimes, but also if they wanted to show that whole thing, don't just chuck it like 20 minutes before the end. But if they're going to do it with the shows and stuff, have that glamour, have all these characters dancing on the stage, and then maybe cut to people in the audience, maybe touching their wife, or, you know, like maybe slapping a waitress on the ass. Do something like that to show that element of it, not kind of glorify all of it and then just go at the end, oh yeah, but they're all sleep-eyed.
And the problem with it is as well is that the whole film is extremely sexually aggressive. And so by the time Molly gets pulled into that room, part of me is almost like, and I'm not saying that we in this discussion found it this way, but part of me is always like, is this supposed to be like titivating in the same way that everything else is? Because everything else is so over the top, so hyperbolic, so sexual, that I'm like, is this meant to just be part of the show, as it were? Whereas I watched a film and I honestly, like, I feel like this film in particular, like, really, really gave me like a really bad panic attack as to how, I want to say graphic, but it wasn't. There's an Australian film called Hounds of Love. It's a really low budget horror, but they did exactly what you did. So it's this couple and they've abducted this girl, and you know from sort of like hints that they're going to basically rape her for an entire weekend and then ditch her body. But instead of showing you anything, they literally just show the couple walking towards the door. You hear her start to scream and then you just hear the door click. You don't need to know what's going on behind the door. And I very much feel the same way with Molly as well, especially because she wasn't a character who was directly involved. It's not like she was someone who, you know, had a bad thing coming her way. She was a costume designer. So she wasn't, trampling all over other women. She was actually a helpful character. She was a nurturing character. And instead we just get another display of sexual aggression, but only this time it's an assault. And it really stands out for all. I mean, I find it horrific to watch. And I particularly, as I say, find the aftermath where they literally cast it aside. But I don't know why it's in the film. I don't.
And it's also, it leads me on to think about the morals of the film as well, which is like, you know, again, what I was kind of appreciating at the beginning was this kind of like defiance from Nomi to be like, no, I won't do cocaine. There's several times in which she's like offered that. And again, that's why I think of, you know, other kind of films which are about success and things going wrong, and how things get, you know, bad. But again, they show the aftermath and the kind of realization of how that gets bad, in which they're like, oh, I have become this horrible monster. What have I done? And that never really happens. But again, because the kind of tragedy that happens to another character. And, you know, can you really say that it's Nomi which was like responsible for that just by taking it to the party? Because again, she didn't seem to take any of the burden of that on herself. It's not like it was somebody she was close to or she advocated to. But in terms of like, later on, you know, she keeps rejecting drugs, but then like when she's with that manager, she just like snorts some cocaine and then walks away. And I'm like, is there any kind of repercussions to this? You know, are you going to have that kind of like, you become Crystal, you're going to become like a mess and that kind of stuff? It never happens.
Not to mention the fact that the police report that they have also implies that she's taken drugs before.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So she's not it's almost like she's not become a monster because they read her rap sheet or whatever. So it's like, look, she was a bad character all along. You know, the only thing she sort of does defiantly is eat burgers as opposed to the brown rice and vegetables that they keep insisting.
Oh, and what the hell was that dog food thing about? I ate dog food. I love it. And I was like, what?
Yeah. I don't know if that's supposed to be erotic. That also makes me feel sick, but for different reasons. But even that's very like 90s of like, you know, heroin chic was very much a thing at that point. And if you couldn't see every single, you know, bone from your neck down, you were obviously grossly overweight. So even those sort of messagings. But again, it's so on the nose that you just can't look at it and go, oh, wow, what an amazing critique of that industry, because she should be able to eat whatever she wants. You can't even look at it like that because it's just, it's too on the nose.
And that's the other thing that implied to me as well, that she previously was like on heroin or cocaine or whatever. Because I was like, you look pretty well in shape. And everyone else is telling you manage your weight. And she's like, no, I'm going to keep eating burgers. I'm just like, I'm pretty sure you've taken drugs and that's why you need like a massing induction of calories.
Which again is a shame that they don't either bring that in soon to the film to show why she's defiant against it. Because originally I was just kind of like, oh, is it just because she has got a moral center point? She is this character who's quite naive, quite innocent, wants to do the right thing. Which again is just unfortunate that then...
Sorry. You see her with like a flip knife in a cup and like just flipping out over things, and your reading of her is naive and innocent.
Well, in terms of I don't know, drug use or innocent in the sense of like she's innocent to like what the perils are of doing these things. So I think the knife thing almost speaks to that of like, yeah, I can just flip out a knife and nothing will happen. There'll be no repercussions. Similar with, the art, the singer, which obviously, doing the kind of right thing in a way there, but it goes to show the kind of arrogance of the character, like the drug use, in which there doesn't seem to be any repercussions to it, even though previously she was showing a hesitancy, which I thought, like you said, was more of a kind of like she was a morally better character, that she was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be the better person, because I thought they would lead into her kind of, revealing the scumminess of this entire place. And the only thing that alludes to that is just her leaving Vegas, which, again, is also tainted by the fact that the whole sequel thing happened. But
I just hate the fact they skipped the first 6 months of her being there and just... I feel like if you're going to have any impact for how this industry necessarily operates, I think you need to actually show how she gets into it in the first place. I think if you're going to have any message, rather than just, in that time, she became a stripper, and then she wanted more.
Yeah, I think it moves too quickly, because I mean, the first 10 minutes though is, again, so it's so, she literally wins big and loses it all within the first 10 minutes. Like, you could just stop watching there, because you know what, folks, that is the plot. If we're going to say that there is one, it's like you're going to scoot right to the top and then it's all going to come crashing down. That's it. That's the metaphor. But even that, yeah, and then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, she's working on this really seedy bar for this really, horrible, horrible boss who is just like threatening to, I don't know, fire people or make them give them blowjobs or whatever. And even that, you're just like, how is she going from that to this? And she's obviously living with Molly, who again is painted as this nice person who just helps her because she sees her and she knows that, it's maybe easy to get swallowed up in a big town like that or whatever. But it's just, yeah, there's so many gaps, there's so many plot holes, there's so many. I mean, part of me is always like, I'm surprised they've not made a prequel to explain how Crystal got to where she got to, but I'm not going to put any ideas in anyone's head.
Well, I think that's where sometimes I do struggle, and, I agree with you. I think it is, badly done. I think that's just where sometimes with these type of films, I'm like, I can give it a slightly bit more credit, or I can at least say I've enjoyed it a bit more, only because at least they're being a bit more bold or ambitious with the characters, or just kind of like, it's entertaining me to a degree. It's not boring. That's what I'll say, is that, the pace of it, the kind of characters are so larger than life. I'm like, okay, there is some form of entertainment here from that. I think a character like, when I listed them in the cast, is someone like Hilary Bazoum. I was like, I'm pretty sure I know who this character is, of literally like, oh, what if we had this character who literally her like boobs just pop out of her dress, and she does this kind of like, gag, because that's the type of actor she is at that club. And I'm like, probably. But even that's a comment, right? Because she's not this 90s stick thin woman. Yeah. So of course she's the comedy act. She's the one that comes on and tells jokes, or her boobs fall out of her dress, because she's not like a size 2. And even that got on my nerves as well, because it's so crude in its depiction of, nobody could ever desire this woman like that. And it might as well just have a sign above her.
And the fact that her humor is also the sort of stereotypical sort of borderline disgusting femme, like.
Oh yeah, and let's not forget the line, which is like, she looks better than a 10-inch dick and you know it. Which I was like, oh, because I was hoping that the character would be like, goes on stage, kind of like gives all of those cheesy jokes to the men, throws it back at them, but then is actually quite a nice sort of like mother figure behind the scenes. But she's not. She's just there to carry on doing those same jokes.
But they also portray that as being the motherly figure, and then she appears once afterwards and never again. Yeah.
So to be clear, Mary, I'm not disagreeing with you. I was using it as an example of, yes, I think this is what you're going for in this character, and it is an example of being so bold and kind of cartoonish about it. But it's just unfortunate that you just don't give them any of the kind of characterization or kind of interesting elements which would actually make this work. They are only just the stereotype that you want them to be.
It just feels like that's the sort of addition that was made by talking to people about their experiences, but not actually knowing exactly what that looks like, right? It very much feels like, our spirits were lit up because we had this one who would just do the comedy act, but she was, she was quite like male-esque sort of humor, but just get us through, and they're just like, right, okay, so she's clearly like a fat older woman, right? That just felt like sort of it's their interpretation of what people are saying.
Well, I think even that would be fine if there was a commentary on it. You know, that if that realism was there, is that, you know, maybe she was like, look, I'm only here because like I'm there as a joke, you know. And
there's loads of things I would say if the film did this, I'd be fine about it. It just doesn't, unfortunately. That's not the great world we live in this situation. We have to deal with it.
And I think if that character was to be done now, again, it would be something like potentially like a drag act or something like that. Maybe even a chance to have a bit of better representation or have a more morally better character. But yeah, it's just...
I'll be honest, I'm glad there wasn't that much representation in this film, if only not to drag the reputation of those groups into this film.
I know,
let's be
it's
fair.
very white, hetero, and it's very problematic.
When you look at something like her calling like the dress, like, oh, it's from Varese, and you know, and I'm like, you know, that like, why didn't they do more with that? You know, and that kind of like
that is
part
a
of the
sweet
character.
moment. I'm going to agree with you on this because I think maybe we've all, and that, but again, that hints to a character who's more naive than we find out she is, because she says, it's for what is it? She says Varese, whatever she is, in the room to the executives, and they all have their little chuckle, like, oh, look at her from bumblefuck nowhere, like she obviously doesn't know designer clothes. But actually, given that her rap sheet, and he says you've always had a taste for the finer things, which means she must have known what Versace was. It doesn't even make sense to the later reveal. And but it's annoying because it is a kind of, it is a more relatable moment. We've all tripped over our words, and we've all, you know, pronounced a word wrong or whatever. But it doesn't. But again, it doesn't make sense to the rest of the character.
Yeah, it's the film's My Fair Lady sort of moment.
And this, it's bizarre that they don't they choose like, oh well, what if she was this, what if she was that, you know. It's just erratic things. One thing I cannot condone as well, and like I said, there's many times.
We found it. Cool.
No, but
is it Kyle MacLachlan's hair? Because I can't condone that either.
Well, that I just saw as a vain attempt at replicating Joey from Friends, potentially. I was like, do you just want him to be Matt LeBlanc? Like, that's all I saw him as, maybe trying to look like him.
He does look a bit like Matt LeBlanc, you're right.
So no, is when I was like, okay, I appreciate that, you know, you're not going complete, like, you know, like, we're not supposed to touch you, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And, you know, she's trying to resist it again. I agree. She definitely then has actions which go against that. She was at least resisting certain drugs and certain attitudes where they're like, let's go party, let's go do this. And she was like, no, I won't do it. But when she's in that car with James and she's eating that burger and she just chucks the wrap out of the car, I was like, I will not condone litter. This is not right.
Oh, you are such a little weasel. I swear to God.
No, but to be clear,
I'm sorry, you're confused about her dying on the hill of the ice cubes. How are you dying on the hill of littering? Like, this is the least problematic.
I'm not saying that's the most problematic, to be clear. I'm just saying that was the moment in which I was like, you know what? No.
David, I need to check at this point.
No, I want to say this. I was like, oh, I appreciate that you were rejecting drugs. I appreciate that she was not like trying to go down the dark path.
I love how you're actually pointing right now.
Yeah,
like, as if you're getting her into trouble.
But once she threw that litter, then I knew she was a bad egg. That's what I'm saying. So then the later stuff then made more sense.
I have to say, of all the takes I've ever heard on Showgirls, this might just be the weirdest.
Is this your Paul Cornish moment? You knew everyone's going to come into this hating you, so like, I'm for the sake of content, I'm going to take a perspective. And then
I have never said that I justify anything else you've said, and this is the only thing I have problem with. I just thought it was worth highlighting amongst everything else.
Oh, in case anyone was just like in the comments, like, I find it really problematic you didn't talk about the one random scene of littering in the middle of Las fucking Vegas, where like a single burger wrapper is literally a drop in the ocean of like the kind of crap that those people do.
This shows her attitude as a character. You know, she's just a very reckless person who doesn't think about the environment in which she's in. So, you know, I wasn't surprised when she pushed that person down the stairs, because
I'm gonna hit you, I swear to God.
To be clear, I'm just saying this because you guys have covered so well the other problematic things. I'm just like...
It's not a contest, Dave. You don't need to be like, in order for me to have a position on this podcast, I need to have a unique selling point here.
Yeah, we can just all agree that the film is terrible, there's no plot, the rape scene's unnecessary, and that, honestly, if I was Kyle MacLachlan's agent, I would have fired him after this. Like, that's the key takeaways, right?
Okay, take those cassettes, rewind them, and play them again, because it's time for VHS Corner. Because what we needed in this episode is more of David talking about this film. And that's exactly what we're going to get. I've asked David to look at the behind the scenes film. So David, tell us how many pieces of trash were discarded, how much recycling, how much energy was used by every single one of those Vegas stage productions. What did you find for us this week?
There were no dogs or cats represented in this film, and that was sad. No.
I swear to God.
I'm joking.
There was.
What's
It
that?
was a dog. It was a dog.
There was.
Yeah.
You didn't even see a stray in the streets or anything.
I thought there was one dog.
Vegas is a cruel place. I told you that was the messaging they were going for. So the first thing, we've talked a lot about the legacy of this film and people sort of like giving it praise and reevaluating it, etc. Something interesting, Mary has already mentioned the strange sequel, but there's also a small kind of documentary film called You Don't Know Me, lol, from 2019. Which traces the film's redemptive journey from notorious flop to cult classic and maybe even masterpiece. Their words, not mine. It is directed by Jeffrey McHale and has a lot of segments which takes interviews from some of the people involved, which are sort of also involved in the career of the director, etc. Going back to when the film was released, when the film swept the 16th annual Razzie Awards, I know, shocker, Paul Verhoeven turned up in person to accept Worst Director and Worst Picture. He was the first director to ever turn up to collect the award.
Wow,
now
fair play.
We've talked a lot about like people's experiences, talking about like them interviewing people from this industry, but thankfully there wasn't any complaints of actual kind of like misbehavior or anything to do with the nudity in this film. The only time actresses complained that they felt uncomfortable was during the scene with the monkeys who constantly stared at their breasts. Which also, by the way, was the most 90s thing for them to do, was just a bunch of monkeys running into
there was
a room.
Again, so almost like the erotic thriller. I feel like there was a period in time in the 90s where every sort of film had a monkey sidekick.
Yeah, exactly. And was Michael Jackson's Pet like that popular that they were like, right, let's go all in on monkeys. So as of 2020, Showgirls is the highest grossing NC-17 film of all time and is the most expensive to be made, with a US budget of $45 million, and the only NC-17 film to ever be given wide distribution, and that's in about 1,400 theaters. As you mentioned, it swept the Razzie Awards, and in that time, they attempted to remarket it as a midnight cult flick a la the Rocky Horror Picture Show. A new print ad with leopard skin patterned background and prominently mentioning the film's 7 Razzie wins ran in several LA area newspapers, promoting midnight showings in West Hollywood. Clever though it was, this new marketing gimmick also failed at the time. However, since then, the movie has indeed a significant degree of a cult following, with fans showing up in Showgirls-themed attire at screenings of the movie. Several influential filmmakers such as Quentin Tarantino, Jim Jarmusch, and Jack Rivette have professed their appreciation of the movie. Screenwriter Joe Estarres and Paul Verhoeven, the director, both claim that they frequently meet people who secretly admit they loved the movie. The critical reevaluation of the film even inspired author Adam Naiman to write the novel It Doesn't Suck, in which he makes a case for the movie being an actual masterpiece.
Can I ask a question? I've obviously got the leopard print on tonight.
Oh.
What is Showgirls themed attire? How does one turn up to a midnight screening? What are you supposed to... There's not much clothes involved in that.
We'll get to it. Just note it down as one of the many things we have to react to in these facts. Kyle MacLachlan, you'll be glad to know there's some representation to you, Mary, later recalled seeing the film for the first time at the premiere and said, I was absolutely gobsmacked. This is horrible. And it's a very slow, sinking feeling when you're watching the movie and the first scene comes out and you're like, oh, that's a really bad scene. But you say, well, that's okay. The next one will be better. And you somehow try to convince yourself that it's going to get better and it just gets worse. And I was like, wow, that was crazy. I mean, I really didn't see that coming. So at that point, I distanced myself from the movie. Now, of course, it has a whole other life as a sort of inadvertent satire. No, satire isn't the right word, but it's inadvertently funny. So it's found its place. It provides entertainment, but not in the way I think it was originally intended. It was just maybe the wrong material with the wrong director and the wrong cast. A lot of what we've mentioned there. Going back to directors, a source once told Paul Verhoeven that Steven Spielberg had requested a copy of the movie after the premiere. Reportedly, Steven Spielberg stopped watching halfway through the movie while saying, Sometimes I hate this town.
That's immense.
So when the film tanked on its opening weekend, writer Joe Ezarantis took the unprecedented step of taking out an ad in Variety urging female moviegoers to go see the movie, not because it was semi-pornographic, but it highlighted the expectations that lap dancers are subjected to. He attacked the studio for using cheap marketing tricks where they used the tagline, "Leave your inhibitions at the door," to sell the film as a cheap sex movie. Needless to say, this tactic didn't help the film anyway. And then just some slight stuff on what Paul Verhoeven has said since. In a 2013 interview, he explained his motives for doing the movie. He did not like Joe's original script and passed on the project in favor of doing The Crusade, based on screenplay by Wallen Green and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. However, that project fell through. When Carl Octo Pictures could not afford to finance it. Since $10 million had already been spent on Crusade, Zarens received $4 million for his Showgirls screenplay. Verhoeven felt morally obligated to do Showgirls as a personal favor to Mario Casa to save Carol Occo from bankruptcy, which is the film studio. The writer's screenplay was extensively rewritten with All About Eve as the main source of inspiration. Verhoeven intended it to be an over-the-top morality tale populated with only amoral characters except for the character of Molly, with Las Vegas as a metaphor for hypocrisy and extortion. However, the satirical intentions were not picked up by the critics, who regarded the movie as a simplistic portrayal of American culture, and the box office failure of both this movie and Cutthroat Island made the bankruptcy of Carl Occo inevitable. So the film studio still fell through anyway. So a lot of stuff we were talking about there, and reactions and different kind of legacy things, which have also been echoed throughout time. Craig, you sort of were putting your hands in your head, head in your hands a few times during that.
He didn't want to make the film and then did it as a favor. If that doesn't scream of everything that I've represented about this film, I don't know what else to... Because it's one thing to have a problematic image of yourself, despite the fact you shouldn't, and just put it out there. It's another thing, if you didn't want to do it in the first place and you're press-ganged into doing it, why? Oh my God! So,
just to be clear, if he had stuck to his guns, we wouldn't have had to watch this.
Yeah.
We would have been saved a whole 2 hours. Or in my case, I think maybe 4 or 6. I can't remember how many times I've actually seen it.
Well, it would have saved us 2 hours, and it would have saved Steven Spielberg about an hour and a half from the sounds of it.
Yeah, thankfully he wasn't in that list of directors. I wasn't surprised Quentin Tarantino was in there.
No, I'm really not surprised.
I was like, we know you, Quentin. You have a bit of some weird ideas of attractiveness, etc. So that didn't surprise me.
I also just love the fact that they realize, oh, guys, women aren't watching this film. We need to do something about it. And part of their marketing was just attacking the original marketing. Because if we learned anything from like how, people who worked on Cats advertise Cats, there's nothing that sells a movie more than actively trashing your own work. We call it the cordon.
I'm assuming, Mary, that you enjoyed at least Carl MacLachlan's reactions to the film.
Yeah, I'm glad that he recognised really quickly that it was shit. I think that's important for him redeeming himself in my eyes, because obviously he won't be able to sleep knowing that I fell out of love with him for a couple of years after seeing this the first time around. It just seemed like a weird choice, like for him as an actor, because I would say he was probably, apart from obviously Elizabeth Berkley, because as I say, she was fresh out of Saved by the Bell, he must have been one of the, if not the biggest name in that film at the time, which means presumably a lot of the marketing maybe piggybacked on his sort of fame and success, and just to sit there and watch your own film and know that it's terrible, I can't even imagine how that must feel.
It's been clear what people's reactions have been to this film, so this might be the quickest movie vault ever. But yeah, we now go to the part of the podcast where we go to the movie vault, which we like to think of as a time capsule of memorable movies for someone to dig up in the future. So should Showgirls from 1995 gain the honor of a place in our movie vault and be remembered for all time? If I was to build any type of tension here, I could only say that bad films have gone in before, like The Room and Good Luck Chuck. but yeah, I don't know. Craig, I'm assuming it's a straight no.
Clearly, it's a no for me. I think, A, this is part of a genre which doesn't really exist to the fullest extent, and B, the worst version of that genre should not exist. At which point, I don't think that this is a film that should be remembered. I think that if you're going to go for the erotic thriller, Basic Instinct, I think exists. I think if you're going to look at the critique of sort of Vegas and the ways in which like industry workers of all different levels are treated, I think there are things done specifically from their perspective. What?
Sorry, I thought you were going to say like Elvis, and I was just going to go like point like that's what I thought you were going to say.
No, but that's a bit different though. I'm specifically talking about sex workers in this situation.
Okay, right, okay, fair.
Unless you want to really make a case for why Elvis is. But yeah, no, it's a no from me, fam.
Not surprising, and I guess Mary, like Craig was saying there, if there was to be that list of like successful erotic thrillers, etc., you might be there like. Here is the list. Here are the ones that you would sort of recommend.
Yeah,
but as far
like
as this is concerned, I assume it's a no, maybe.
Oh, it's a hard no. It's burn all the copies. It attempts to show exploitation, but is in itself exploitative. And the thing is, you get laughs, right? You do. The pool scene will forever live in my memory as some of the worst sex I have ever seen. By two, like, aesthetically pleasing people as well. That's what makes it so bad. But yes, I don't think anyone else should ever have to be subjected to Paul Verhoeven's Showgirls. So it's a no from me.
Do you know what I also find really funny about the pool scene and to a degree, the representations of sex in this film, essentially, apart from her and James, are just her and that, I can't remember his name now, like the manager character. So yeah, every time you see sex happening, it's her and him, and both representations are equally bad and unsexy, especially the first one, which is not exclusively to this film, but there seems to always be that kind of like idea of like, oh yeah, look how like hot and like exotic this is, that this woman has like made this man like climax like really quickly jumping on his lap. It's like, I think if that played today, usually it would be more of a like, oh, that's disappointing kind of moment, not this kind of like Crystal walking away like, yeah, that was great, and I'm like, was it? Like the fact that he's just walking away from that, I was like, yeah, that's kind of disgusting, like knowing what's happened there. But yeah, the pool thing, I just can't even fathom what they were thinking. What was sexy about that? What was happening? I don't understand. Maybe this was a dance sequence of some form because she was so erratic throughout. But yeah, even though I was kind of justifying some elements of this, and I was kind of saying that, I enjoyed some of the like boldness and lunacy, I think ultimately, yes, I agree with everything you guys have said. I think that, yes, there was the case for maybe some things were a bit more like, oh, well, there was some maybe moral character with Molly, etc. But no, I definitely agree that, it's bad representation. The characters are very cheesy and cliched and bad versions of that. The story's all over the place. It doesn't really have a good sort of like moral center or kind of like conclusion. And its nudity and stuff isn't really used for effect apart from just like, oh, it's nudity, go see it because of that. So, while, I was somewhat entertained by the story, etc., I don't think it's strong enough of like, it's so bad it's good, or, of any kind of like build up to anything we got in the future to recognize. So not into the movie vault this week for Showgirls.
So much for the quickest movie vault ever.
Well, I thought you guys were just going to go no, and then that would be it. So yeah, not into the movie vault for Showgirls. But do you disagree at home? Are you Quentin Tarantino? Let us know.
We're in the end game now.
Okay, endgame time. So this is a game simply called Sex Appeal. Basically, I feel like we all deserve a little bit of a palate cleanser. I feel that this film, to some degree, has made us feel dirty, whether that's like for myself and Mary morally, or for David insofar as litter on the road. I obviously just had to plan that intro now. He did not tell me that was a stance of his, but basically what I've done is I found a list which has, which doesn't rank, it just talks about the 100 sexiest movie characters of all time. And for each character, they've got a description of that character and the trait that makes them sexy. What I appreciate about this is that it's not always physical. There are sometimes things that they do or like emotional attributes that makes them sexy. And that I think is important because we do not always support positive looking people. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the description and the trait that makes them sexy. And I want you, basically, very simply, what film is this character that I'm talking about from?
Okay.
Sometimes it'll be a bit more difficult to work out. Sometimes there will be something quite explicit that will make it very clear who it is. This is going to be, both of you will answer every question. So this is each round I will alternate who gives me their answer first. If you're right, you get a point. If you're wrong, you don't. Okay? Mm-hmm. Everyone clear on the rules?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. But as always, we need to work out exactly what it is we'll be playing for. And as usual, our guest, or David, will have the opportunity to choose what film we discuss on the next episode. It can be one of their choices, or it could be mine. And for change, we'll start with mine. This film had obviously a lot of dancing, and we've discussed the degree to which a lot of that dancing seemed quite aggressive and quite intimidating at times, especially, say, the choreographer scenes screaming like the Frost or whatever it was he was screaming. So what I decided is I wanted to have a film about dancing to its core that specifically looked at the power of dancing for good. I feel that we need this. I think we need some positive nostalgia as opposed to this, which has like a different form of nostalgia, you know, for teenage Craig. Take of that what you will. But specifically, I wanted to choose a film that has the power of dancing for good. So if you win, you can choose my film, or you can choose one of your own. So let's start with Mary. Tell us a little bit about your film. Oh, my film's from 1984, by the way.
Excellent. So I was really torn between a couple of films, but the more I think about it, the more I'm leaning towards this one. So this is a film from 2016. The director, I think, is quite divisive. I think you either like their content or you don't. So I feel like that's kind of ties into Paul Verhoeven, but essentially it is another sort of expose of following your dreams, I guess. But it's much, much better in comparison to Showgirls, and it also is an excellent horror.
Okay, interesting. I thought I knew what it was, but then I got completely thrown by that bit.
That's happened to you a few times recently, hasn't it?
Yeah. So we have the horror film talking about following your dreams sometimes being a bad thing. And finally, David, tell us about your film.
So my film is from 2004, and my connection to Showgirls is that rather than following some of the same kind of like elements of entertainment or types of characters that we have in this film, I wanted to dramatically get away from all of that, but looking at, what are they doing in Showgirls? What are the type of actions they're doing? And as we said, there is dancing, and to dance, you need to have a lot of flexibility. So this film focuses on very big flexibility. And if you're talking about female characters, I can't think of any female character that is better representation of this. Like, if we want to go down the better representation of female characters, this one knocks everything else outside of the park. It's very different. I would say we were talking about the kind of style of Vegas. This is another film which nothing to do with Vegas, but it does go heavily on its style, but is very effective in terms of creating a time and a setting. And yeah, it's just a very fun, good time, brings everyone together, has a bit of body positivity in it to some degree, having characters come out to their shell and using their kind of like attributes to their advantage, and just being, a great kind of woo sort of story.
Interesting. So we have the range of films from 1984 to 2016 to 2004. Will it be David's? Will it be Mary's? Will it be mine? We will find out by the end of this game. So, are we ready for the first description of our sexy, sexy character?
Okay.
Okay. The character.
I thought you were going to say that was the game of the sexy, sexy game.
you need to stop. Okay, character one. An all-American man of action whose ability to dispense with bad guys is matched only by his love for his family. He might not always know how to show it, but his heart is firmly in the right place. Sexiest quality? Willingness to walk across broken glass, literally, to rescue his wife from danger. Grr.
Oh, I thought I knew this from the first sentence, and now I've got no idea.
Could you repeat? Could you say, not like you don't have to say the sexiest quality one, but the bit before that?
An all-American man of action whose ability to dispense with bad guys is matched only by his love for his family. He might not always know how to show it, but his heart is firmly in the right place. And for those at home who assumed this was going to be all female characters, shame on you.
Oh my god, the name of his, but he escaped me. John Krasinski in the film about monsters and they can't make a sound or a noise. John Krasinski's character in...
I know the name of the film now.
A Quiet Place.
A Quiet Place.
It is not.
Oh.
It is not A Quiet Place.
I was thinking Walking Over Glass, but maybe I'm thinking of her walking on her nail.
Okay, and Mary, you said you pass, right? Or do you want to?
Yeah, because I was thinking, is it the first John Wick or something like that? But no, it can't be. I don't think he walks on glass in that.
Okay, so we've got John Krasinski, John Wick. They are both incorrect.
Of course they are.
Ironically, the character's name is John. It's John McClane from Die Hard.
Oh, okay.
Character number 2. The free spirit to Natalie Portman's contrast, who plays very hard indeed. How much of her persona is actually created by Portman's subconscious is up for debate, but her sex appeal most certainly is not. Sexiest quality. Vincent Cassel's leery dance maestro put it best when he snarls, "She's not faking it."
Okay, I think I've got it.
Okay, we'll start with David then.
Is it Mila Kunis in Black Swan?
So you're going Black Swan. Mary?
Yeah, Black Swan. Vincent Cassel's definitely in that, eh?
And you are both correct. It is Black Swan. It is the character of Lily, who is indeed played by Mila Kunis.
Yeah. As soon as you said, like, the image she's making of her, I was like, yeah.
Yeah. So that's 1 point each. Character number 3. The suave bar owner who finds his world turned upside down by the re-entry into his life by his beautiful ex. Sexiest quality? His sheer sense of humour, as he packs Isla back onto a plane, giving her up in order to help the Allies win the war. Damn.
Oh.
Okay, Mary.
Is it Casablanca?
You're going Casablanca, David?
I was also thinking Casablanca.
Yeah?
Yep.
Not just piggybacking?
No, literally, it's like as soon as you said barman, I was like, okay, well, has a barman? But then as soon as you said sending on a plane, I was like, thought of the end scene of Casablanca.
Is it Casablanca? Yeah, it's Rick Blaine from Casablanca. So that's 2 points each. Next character. Perhaps not everyone's cup of tea, but there's no denying the undead heartthrob has a certain effect on a certain age group. Could do with a little bit more sun mind. Sexiest quality? His brooding intensity. Why smile when you can scowl?
I feel like there's a funny answer to this and a serious answer.
I feel like they might be one in the same.
Oh. That makes me feel that I might be wrong.
Well, what were you thinking, David?
All I think of is Nicholas Hoult in Warm Bodies.
So you're going Warm Bodies, Mary?
Okay, I thought the funny answer to this would be Nosferatu, but the serious answer maybe Gary Oldman's Dracula?
So, is it Warm Bodies? Sadly not. Is it Dracula? No.
Oh.
It is a vampire.
Oh.
It's Edward Cullen from Twilight.
Oh, God.
Oh, he is not sexy.
And that's not what you think when you think undead. You know, that's why I thought zombie. I was like...
And hence why this is meant to be a challenge, David. If I'm going to say this sparkling vampire, then you're...
Yeah.
Straight away.
That's fair. Gary Oldman is hot as Dracula. I feel like that is a right answer somewhere.
I would love to see Mary's kind of like vampire hotness scale. Like,
to be fair,
like Gary Oldman above like Edward Cullen and all the teenagers.
To be fair, when we're talking about has a certain effect on a certain age group, it doesn't have to be teens. It could have been like this.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's after 4 characters, 2 points each. Character number 5. Sexiest of all the Disney princesses, she's a feisty young woman who won't be forced into marrying for status or political position. Good for her. Sexiest quality, her refusal to be impressed by assisted showboating.
I mean, when you said the first bit, I was like, this could be any of them, but I think the second part is maybe.
Yeah, I think I've got it.
Okay, so we'll start with Mary this time.
Is it Jasmine from Aladdin?
Is it Jasmine from Aladdin? David?
I actually, my thought was Belle because of Gaston in terms of showboating. But whether it could be argued that Jasmine could also be argued that they still went down that path anyway.
So one of them is correct.
Oh,
so we're going to get our first divergent in points. The character I was talking about was Jasmine.
Oh.
The part that I left out was she refused to be impressed by Prince Ali's genie-assisted showboating.
Okay. I was thinking that they were talking about that guy who was like, hope that in terms of Aladdin, I thought it was talking about the guy who wished that Aladdin's fleas would maul him.
Prince Ahmed.
Yes, yeah.
I'm just thinking of Twisted now. Yeah. I want to rewatch that show at some point. Okay, so we're at 3-2. Still everything to play for. I can't give you this one immediately because I was going to make the awful pun of going from showboating to actual boating, because the next character on this list is Jack Dawson from Titanic. Another of Tarantino's avenging angels, and his prettiest one by far. Her eventual revenge is operatic in its intensity. Sexiest quality? Her pure, focused fury. We like her when she's angry.
I can't remember the character's name.
That's fine. You just need the film.
Okay.
I think. So David?
I think by the fact they're saying about operatic and fury, I'm going to go for Kill Bill.
So you're going for the obvious one.
Yeah.
Mary?
Oh, I was going to go for Inglourious Bastards. The character of Shoshana that owns the cinema.
Okay. So again, one of you is correct. Oh. I'll tell you the character so you'll know a little bit. So the character described as the prettiest avenging angel by far is Shoshana Dreyfus from Inglourious Bastards.
Oh.
That's another point.
But if it was like The Bride, I was like, yeah.
Next up. A genuine tough guy with a fine line in a crowd-wowing dance moves. Sounds like the total package for us. Sexiest quality. His fiercely protective nature. Because nobody... ...
Okay, it's got to be.
Can you say it again? Sorry.
A genuine tough guy with a fine line in crowd-wowing dance moves. Sounds like the total package for us. Sexiest quality. His fiercely protective nature, because nobody... ...
I'm confident in that I've got this one right.
Yeah.
So all eyes are on you, David, at this point.
Is my turn to be first, or is it?
Well, otherwise you're going to hear Mary's and just go, oh yeah, that's right.
That's true. Yeah,
I'm like a...
my confidence might be misplaced. Let's not kid ourselves.
I'm like a lion with antelope. I target the weak ones.
I don't know. There's a few things that popped into my head. Well, one thing that popped into my head that's actually kind of weird if people picked that. So I'm going to go with Footloose, Kevin Bacon.
You're going for Footloose? Mary?
I think it's Johnny from Dirty Dancing.
Nobody puts baby in the corner. It is Dirty Dancing.
This is where being male has to let me down.
Next up. But going into this, it's 5-2. The character that introduced this actor to an army of flustered fangirls. He is a bit of a cad who finds his heart melted by Julia Stiles' cat. Aww. Sexiest quality? His willingness to make a bit of a tit of himself in the name of love, as demonstrated by his stadium set sing-along.
Yeah. Dave, you were never a teenage girl. Just admit defeat now.
Is this like Jerry Maguire or something?
You're going for Jerry Maguire.
10 Things I Hate About You.
Things I tell David regularly. Yep, it's 10 things I hate about you.
At first, I was like, wait, me and Mary getting points in an end game? This is going well.
I know.
Way too well.
Let's just cherish this moment.
Okay, the product of a stack of old Playboys and some questionable science, Lisa is the pop sock-wearing girl dream of teenage nerds Wyatt and Gary. Sexiest quality? Her seeming disinterest in getting fully dressed. Vest, pants, socks, and we're done. That's not me just giving up. That is literally what it says in the article.
I think I might have an idea just based on the plot of this.
Okay, so we'll go to Mary first.
Okay, in which case I'll have to pass. I don't have a clue.
So you have no idea?
Is this weird science?
Has he got the point? Yes, he has.
Okay, this is kind of like the being a male has helped. It's like, wait, a film in which two men construct a robot woman? It's like, I know what this is.
Yeah, it's almost as if I have to balance this game ever so slightly. So it's 5-3. We have 3 left. As hapless every men go, Cary Grant's bemused hero is a pretty cool customer. Others may seduce him for their own ends, but it is surely no hardship for them. Sexiest quality? His ultra-dry sense of humor, as demonstrated by his performance in the auction room. And this is one of my favorite films, believe it or not.
Auction room.
That's what's thrown me.
Yeah.
I thought it was one of 2 other films, and now I'm not sure.
So what films did you think it was?
I wasn't sure if it was Charades or Bringing Up Baby. I don't think either of them have an auction scene in it, do they?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just like completely blank. I just think Cary Grant was mentioned. I'm like, can I think of any films right now which have her in it?
I mean, he is suave and gets women in like every film.
Yeah, exactly. I can't even think of film. Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Okay. Oh, actually, is it The Philadelphia Story?
It is neither of those, but I just really want to focus for a minute on Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Cary Grant.
I know. I was like, I know this isn't Cary Grant, but I'm just going to mention
who's been in various Hitchcock films.
That's kind of like,
this is a Hitchcock film. How did you not get this?
It's North by Northwest.
It's North by Northwest.
The Hitchcock fan. No, it's just because Mary had mentioned like teen heartthrob things earlier, and I was like, I'm just going to go for one of those, just,
Well, some might call that a mistake.
I honestly thought it would be a rom-com because it was about him being seduced. I never think of North by Northwest as like a film where you actually focus on Cary Grant as being like hot. That's what's thrown me.
Running from the plane like, ooh.
Okay, so we've got the penultimate question.
Okay.
So just to let you all know, if Mary scores 1 more point, Mary wins. Mm-hmm. If Mary doesn't, but David gets both of these right, we go to a tie break.
Right.
Excellent.
So it's still everything to play for. The character. Teenage rebellion has never been performed with such a glint in the eye as this guy. The rascal's rascal. Sexiest quality? Sorry, this is a word I've never seen before. It's preternatural ability. His preternatural ability to land on his feet. Life just seems so easy for him.
I get a definition of what preternatural.
Preternatural is just beyond what is normal or natural. So it's actually fine. So it's everything seems to work out for this character, and in the course of this film, various chaotic things happen. And he seems to come out relatively unscathed every time.
Can you read the start of it again? Sorry.
Teenage rebellion has never been performed with such a glint in the eye as by this character. The rascal's rascal.
I'm torn between 2 now.
Yeah, I had 2, but I think I have to just go for the one, for the lols.
What's the one you want to go for the lols?
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Jesus Christ. So David's going with Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Mary?
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure if it... Well, actually, now I've got 3 in my head. I wasn't sure if it was Marty McFly in Back to the Future, Johnny Depp in Cry Baby, or James Dean in Giant.
Okay, well, you will have to pick one. There was
another one which was in my head as well, which was none of those. So I thought which might have been one of yours. But
Okay, which one are you going to go for?
Oh, do you know what? I'll go for Marty McFly in Back to the Future because he always lands on his feet and they make a focus of his trainers and his hoverboard, so I'll go for that.
Okay. One of you is correct.
Oh.
Oh, no.
I think I know.
The correct film is... David, what do you think the correct film is?
Is it Back to the Future?
It's Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
yes! It was
Excellent.
Craig's reaction, the laugh. I was like, no, I haven't got this. So I was just like...
That's called acting, David.
I've
so funny.
willed it into being.
So we go into the final question. Mary on 5, David on 4.
Oh, God.
This is the closest David has been in a while. Okay, the character. Anne Bancroft's predatory older lady who sets her sight on Dustin Hoffman's titular hero and refuses to look elsewhere until she has him in her bed. Sexiest quality? The thing which was missing in all of Showgirls, her sexual authority, as shown by the way she toys with Hoffman like a cat playing with its dinner.
Pretty sure I know.
Yeah.
David?
It's just if the freaking name of the film comes
Oh,
to
right.
me. It is... Oh, what is it?
I'm now doubting myself that I've got the title of this correct.
Yeah. I might have to pass on the note that I think once Mary says it, I'll be like, oh, for God's sake.
Okay, so you're going to pass.
Oh, it's like there on the like edge of my brain. It is Mr. Nice Guy. I don't know.
So David's answer is Mr. Nice Guy. Mary?
I'm doubting myself. Is it The Graduate?
I think it is. Yeah.
And here's to you, Mrs. Robinson. It's The Graduate.
Yeah, I knew it.
But honestly, because you were taking so long, I was like, okay, well, it obviously can't be called The
Yeah,
Graduate.
it's because
then,
I
'cause feel
said
like
Jerry
that's-
Maguire earlier, and I was like thinking in my mind it was a name, and I was like, but it was like The Graduate. Like
You
I
were
knew-
thinking of the song, Here's to You,
that's
Mrs.
probably-
Robinson.
and because I thought of like Driving Miss Daisy as well. That was in my mind, and I was like, is this something to do with which I know is not that film, but I was like, is it Mrs. Robinson or Miss Daisy or something like that? So which is I was like, whatever.
Well,
annoying.
with a respectable end score of David on 4, we have our winner of today's end game, which is Mary on 6.
I'll
Cherish
take
this
that.
moment, guys.
I'll take that.
How do you feel?
Oh, elated. I don't honestly like. I feel like every time I come on here, I disgrace myself in the end game. So now I've been redeemed.
I think both of us came into it being like, well, at least I'm against Dave, or at least I'm against Mary. But then we both came out okay. So I think that we
I feel
both,
again,
we've
these are
redeemed
both
ourselves.
respectable.
Yes, yeah.
And you have given some absolutely fantastic moments.
Yeah.
Like the Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So before we move on, I would like to thank the author of the article that I was using, which was from gamesradar.com. If you want to learn who they have as the 100 sexiest movie characters of all time, do look it up. It was very useful for this game. Now, on to the decision. So Mary, you have your own film, you have my film, and you have David's film. Which film would you like to go with for our next episode?
Oh, I'm really torn because I do really love the film that I was thinking of, but I feel like you guys can maybe do with something lighter after your Showgirls travesty. I'm torn. Oh, do you know what? No, I'm going to stick with my own film because actually I think it is worth watching.
Okay,
so tell us a little bit more about your film and then fundamentally what that film is.
Okay, so rather than looking at Showgirls, it looks at modelling, but as I say, it very much comes from a horror perspective and has some great performances and little guest appearances from the likes of Christina Hendricks and Keanu Reeves. The film I'm talking about is, of course, Nicholas Winding Refn's The Neon Demon.
The Neon Demon.
Oh.
Interesting. So this will be the first time in a while that we're actually dealing with horror as well.
yeah, and I think this is one which was kind of in my mind when I was thinking of comparative things, and when I was thinking of like Black Swan. That was like a circumstance in which I was thinking of when this has come up about like nudity and when it's appropriate, etc. But anyway, yes, this is also in that sphere of Black Swan and everything like that, which I was thinking of. So yeah, very interesting. Okay, so Yep, this currently, according to Just Watch, a time of recording, but do check other streaming outlets out, because as with the film we're discussing this week, turned out it was on Amazon Prime, even though Just Watch seems to think that it's only on Arrow. But as of now, you can catch this for rental on Amazon, Apple TV, Chili, YouTube, and I'm sure you can catch it on physical media, etc. as well. So, but do go look on Just Watch is what we use. Sometimes you might even get like a catch-up service like ITV or something. Sometimes might have these films when they've been shown on television. Maybe even Showgirls might have had an ITV2 showing recently and might make a return to ITV.
More than likely.
Thank you again, Mary, for discussing this one with us. It's been a pleasure as always, and lots of fun times. Anything else you want to shout out since you last joined us talking about something far more wholesome in the Muppets? What you got going on?
I did a wee guest spot on Vampire Videos podcast, and we discussed an excellent film, which I can't reveal, but it was my first time watching it, and it was a film from the 1970s. I went in very skeptical, and it totally blew me away. And over at Movie Scramble, we did a pod comparing the lead character in Sisu with the John Wick franchise, which made for some interesting debate. And we also have a pod coming out about what it means to be cancelled. So we'll probably get cancelled as a result of it, but we've tried our best.
Okay, we'll go through our previous episodes and give you all the people we've had to endure talking about through connections to movies, maybe. We're like, no.
This is the year of cancelled individuals for our podcast.
For a moment, I thought you were going to say the Vampire podcast was going to be in which we talk about the sexiness of Gary Oldman.
I did get to mention that, though, and the sexiness, bizarrely, the one time I'll ever find him sexy, of Tom Cruise in Interview with the Vampire.
And now it's crazy when he's got Mission Impossible come out and you go like, this guy is 60 years old, so what is going on? Craig, anything lastly from yourself?
If there's one thing you should take away from this podcast, kids, it's this: don't litter or David will fuck you up.
Right, thank you everyone. Go check out the Neon Demon. Go check out the Neon Demon if you want to join in the
I'm glad you said it properly that time. You said the Neon Demon, and I was like, all right, Jamaican.
Go check out the Neon Demon.
Stop saying that!
You did it.
The Neon Demon!
I think it's just your Welsh brogue coming through.
Yeah. Go check out the Neon Demon on streaming or wherever you may catch it if you want to talk about the film with us and experience it and go through our crazy chain of movies. It's been very fun so far this year, and who knows where that one will lead as well. So catch you in the next one, guys, and have a good one. Bye-bye.
See ya.
To keep up with the latest episodes of Well Good Movies, you can listen to us on all your usual podcast outlets, including Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and rate us where you can to keep our podcast growing. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Well Good Movies to keep up with the latest news and highlights from all our episodes, as well as tell us what movies you want to be discussed in the future. So what are you waiting for? Go check out the film we'll be discussing in next time's episode.